Hello, welcome. This is the Friday voice chat for the Men's Human Rights Discord. We are the Discord that runs the Men's Human Rights website, and we are the semi-official Discord of the Men's Rights subreddit. Today's topic is the education gap, and people wonder, what is the education gap? The education gap refers to a phenomenon where boys are significantly behind girls in education. Boys are doing much worse in education, and this leads to men doing much worse in college and university. And the result of this is how now men are actually economically falling behind women significantly. And as an MRA, I feel, and I think most MRAs feel, that it's better for society to be equal and balanced. So if you have two genders, men and women, you kind of want both genders to be kind of doing the same. You don't want one gender to be behind or ahead of another. It's kind of better to be balanced and equal. So I'm going to share a couple links and then we're going to get started. Please do pay attention to the voice discussion channel. Honestly, the text discussion is as much of a chat as the voice chat. But if you want to look in the voice discussion channel, I have just posted a link from the American Psychological Association, which shows that boys get lower grades in all subjects at all ages. So starting from the age of 6 years old, boys are falling behind. Boys get lower grades, boys get lower GPAs, and this study is about the United States, but this trend happens in other countries as well. And the question is, well, why are boys getting lower grades? Because obviously, if you're getting lower grades, then think about the consequences. That means less boys and girls are qualifying for university. Less boys and girls are qualifying for scholarships. And this is why you get this imbalance. Now, this is why it's a men's rights issue. If it was just the fact that boys were not paying attention as much, or not as smart, or not working as hard, then it would be their own fault, and it wouldn't be a men's rights issue. Except for the fact that boys are getting lower grades, even when they do the same work as girls. And there was a study from MIT, from the MIT School of Economics, from a woman who I have spoken to before. I know her personally. She's an absolute genius. Her name is Camille Terrier. She's a French academic who has studied this issue. And she found, and I'm going to post this study right now, also in the voice discussion, she found that when boys and girls produced identical work, boys got lower grades for the identical work as girls. So there is a discrimination going on in grading, and it has been shown that teachers are giving boys lower grades for the same work. Now, there is an article I want to show you guys, just the screenshot. It's not as in-depth as the study from MIT from Professor Terrier, but I'm going to show you guys because this is something that has happened in more than just one country. So it's not just happening in America. This has been replicated in several places around the world, and this is something that we've seen happening in several places around the world. And the question becomes, is this a psychological problem? Is this something that we have an inherent nature to discriminate against men and boys? Is there a reason why teachers are giving, as you can see, higher marks to girls? And I did a reaction video to Abba and Preach the other day where they were commenting on how men are significantly less likely to go to college now. In the US, the college gap is now 60 to 40%, which means 60% of new college students are female and only 40% of new college students are male. That means an 18-year-old girl is 50% more likely to go to college than an 18-year-old boy. And we're not against girls going to college. We're not against women getting an education. We're against the fact that there's a huge imbalance. We're against the fact that you have this big difference between men and women. We think society is better off when things are equal. So that is today's topic. We have people of all different ages from all around the world in this chat today. So please share your experience about your experience in education, or your kids, or your friends, or your brother, or your sister. There is something going on where men and boys are doing worse in school and doing worse in education. And as MRAs, we want to find out, why is this happening, and what is the solution to the problem? So that is the topic for today.
And if you'll turn your eyes to the description of the YouTube video, if you're watching us on YouTube, you will find that all of these citations, well, most of these citations that have been added so far are in the description. You'll see that we've got two showing that teachers are biased against boys, one which shows that when boys and girls are marked blindly, that is, the teacher can't see their name or their gender, then they score the same amount across the board. But as soon as you add in that name or that gender, so they can tell the gender of the child, suddenly girls get a huge boost to marks. We've also seen in Ireland that they have an algorithm now which gives girls a boost to their marks, or sabotages the marks of boys with the explicit idea that since girls usually score more than boys, that boys shouldn't be allowed to score more than the girls. So they will knock points off of the boys in general just to make sure that the girls' lead is maintained, which kind of invalidates the entire point of marking them in the first place if you're just going to arbitrarily assign points. If you look at the rest of the citations, you'll also notice that we have one from the ex-UCAS chief of the UK, who was basically saying that she wanted to help boys, but feminists raised hell every time she tried to. And then we also have a link from a quote-unquote expert, where the expert is basically saying that since girls are scoring higher than boys, that means that girls are just smarter, and we should just accept this on face, and we shouldn't look deeper into it. And of course, there is a link debunking that completely as well. So I'll open the floor to everyone, and it would be good if we could have some new voices speaking here. So please feel free to voice any experiences that you have had or your friends have had with the school system marking boys lower or treating them unfairly as well, because that often goes overlooked. We've got citations showing that when boys and girls are punished for the same crimes, or quote unquote crimes, for the same bad behavior, the boys are punished much more severely than the girls, even if it's like for like. So I'm opening the floor.
Yeah, like I would like to ask something, is that if will this Ireland horrible human rights violation, as you explained, is that going to just like it seems to completely ignore the individual prestation? They would just give automatically a girl score better than a boy score, even if it's identical prestation.
Yeah, it's like a one gender gets either a bonus or a negative just automatically. So they're either giving the girls a plus to all of their marks, or they're giving the boys a negative. Most likely, they're just giving all of the boys a negative mark. So when their mark is calculated, they get a extra minus score based on being male. You know, as simple as that. So for all the boys listening, if you live in Ireland, please go ahead and tell the teacher that you are transitioning to be a girl right before your GCSEs. I think that would be a good move.
I have another solution for that. Like, Look, I've been applied to.
Actually, just really fast. I want to give you a direct answer. You were saying,
Yeah.
your question was, are you saying that just because they're male, boys are being given lower grades just under law? Like that's the system? And the answer is yes. That is literally the system. I did a video on it. I'm going to post that in the voice discussion right now. But the answer is yes. Literally, the system in Ireland was written in such a way that you got points deducted just for being male. So yes, it was. And as crazy as that sounds, that is actually what happens. And if you watch my video, I actually have a quote from the Minister of Education, a government official, literally said exactly that. That is what happens.
No, that's not actually. That's not surprising at all, actually, because Ireland is a female supremacist state. So why wouldn't they do that? Like, of course, because they're awful.
Imagine.
That like, I'm not surprised. Very easy to see. Like, but I do have a solution for this. I have a very easy solution. Is that, look,
But I'm actually on another call right now on my computer. Do you want me to just call you back when I'm done?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, whatever you can do, man, it's fine.
so
Guys,
Okay, go ahead.
I just shared a Reddit post on voice chat. I think you guys should.
Okay.
Hello?
Okay.
You cutting out?
The form I'm
Yeah,
filling
yeah,
out
we-
is
Guys,
the form
if you've
for
got your mics on, when
Alright.
you're not talking, it creates a lot of background noise on the stream.
okay, I just have to
So,
say. One...
Jake,
No, I have to. I just wanted to say something.
carry on.
Yeah, and then I would like to say is that when I look,
This is actually only going to be in place until the end of the year, so just stay alive until then.
No, I actually believe that this is a perfect solution to
Alright.
to
Okay.
bitch more,
Okay.
because here's basically how I know how to deal with this. It's actually kind of simple. I've not dealt with this, but I know what to do in this circumstance because I, for once, used to live in South Africa, right? But I've also lived in the European Union as you do now, right? And because of that, right, I moved to away because my parents wanted to. I did move to, like, I live in the EU, and then I got my high school degree in the European Union, right? And because of that, I will and then I reapplied to universities in South Africa, and I got accepted for my grades I got in the European Union, right? And this is the case for most countries in the world. So if you live in a country like Ireland and you have kids that go to school, why don't you just go to a different country, get their education there, and then move back because the country you're in hates your children? Like, why wouldn't you do that if your country hates your children? And they have told you that you hate your children. Unless they're your daughters, because they are the only humans with any form of value, apparently. And if the government is saying that, then sure, you make sure that their education system have less students by taking your kids to another country. That's what I would do for my kids, and then move back to them, and I can go to college.
I wouldn't really consider that a 100% good idea, and I'll tell you why. Just give me a second. Yeah, so what I was basically trying to explain is that as of now, what I can say in most countries is that boys will usually be punished like a lot harder than girls. And this is a thing that happens around the world. This happens in the US, this happens in India, this happens in Kenya too. I think it's a worldwide phenomenon, right? And even in Middle Eastern countries, it's the same thing, right? So this can also lead to boys feeling somewhat unwelcome, or they feel like their teachers are too tough on them. And some of them might even say maybe it's because of my gender that I'm being punished more than girls and that kind of thing. So, yeah. I mean, according to um, the Human Rights Watch report called The Violent Education, boys were almost 80% of those who are being paddled in schools. And they said that when they paddle the girls, they don't really paddle them. But when they paddle the boys, they do it like very hard, and also that they'll use like a bigger paddle, the boys, and a small one for the girls.
That's kind of disgusting that they paddle them to begin with, but it's even more disgusting that there's such a huge double standard there. Like, if you're going to do it, then at least do it fairly.
Exactly. The thing is, boys and girls, like when they're very small or when they're very young, there's really not that much physical difference. So, like, you can't have the excuse that, like, a boy is being paddled more because he can take it, because, like, as long as they're younger than maybe 13 or 12, boys and girls' bodies are not that different. It's only when, like, they reach, like, puberty and after a few years that boys start growing like taller and stronger, but like when they're young they're basically pretty much the same. Basically, you shouldn't hit kids no matter what their gender is, but like in the southern states in the US, some schools still practice paddling. And like even here in Kenya, technically it's now illegal to beat students. But my male best friend, he went to a public boys school, and this is in Kenya, right? This is in Nairobi, right? So he went to that school, and the deputy principal, who's like an adult male, obviously, he used to sometimes even punch the boys, like in the face, for like using their phones or something. He was insanely tough on them. Like you could get beaten for like the smallest thing with like canes, or you get punched, or like sometimes even with pipes. It's way too much on like literal children.
Yeah, I think that the entire reason that they go harder on the boys isn't because of the physical differences so much as the empathy gap. Because we have a lot of proof suggesting that people just have a harder time hurting girls than they do boys. Uh, People have just like a lot less empathy for boys, so it's much easier to develop this attitude that boys need to be treated harshly. But I mean, it used to be the case that parents would send children to school with the express knowledge that the school would mistreat them a lot, because the idea was it would build character and that it would make them tougher and it would give them the strength they needed to be rulers of the empire, as it were.
Like this is the problem. Like this is a problem I have with modern view of schooling. People think that like they can outsource the raising of one's children to like a skill, when it comes to the way you want to develop character for your children, it's not something that is in the hands of the fucking education system. It is something the parents should do, not like other people. Why do they outsource it? It's so retarded. And also, like, if you go to school, a lot of children are going to be like, they're not gonna be saints, right? So it's less, and that's gonna happen regardless of what anyone do, right? So just there's no like, even if what they were doing was like, oh, it was really because we wanted to have that character, whatever, right? It doesn't really even like, it's not even required for them to do this end result. It just seems like being like a last excuse.
Yeah, feel free to jump in, anyone who wants to talk. It's an open season on the channel, so go right ahead. Blue, did you have anything to
No, I mean, I would agree. I think anecdotes are very valuable. And people say, well, anecdotes aren't the same thing as scientific data, and that may be true, but I do think there's a lot of value in people giving their personal experiences. Darkisha and I, Katrina and I, we did an interview a few months ago where she was talking about her experiences in high
Um,
school, where she was seeing sexism against boys, as early as high school and even before that. So yeah, like Moss said, this is an open floor. Please feel free to share your experiences. Dark, if you're available, do you want to say anything about the interview we did? Some of the things you saw in high school, and you're in college now. Is there anything you want to add now, or? Okay, I think maybe she can't talk right now. She might be at work, which I actually have to go back to work kind of soon, so I'll be kind of in and out. But yeah, anyone, if you have any personal experiences, I mean, I'm assuming pretty much everyone here has probably been educated at some point or another. Yeah, feel free. Open floor.
Right, thanks, Blue. Um, as I was saying in the chat, I think it's important, especially when we're talking about the anecdotes, personal experiences, because I remember back in the '60s that things were not as different then as they are now, as people might think. That in the future, in the time to come, when those little boys become grown men, if they are sufficiently disenfranchised and disempowered and rendered invisible, we tend to stay that way, and once it reaches a certain point in our in our adulthood, it becomes nearly impossible to recover. It becomes nearly impossible to go from that mindset of being, an underclass of person to just being a person and being, as much of a contributor to the society as anyone else. Once that point has been reached and passed, then trying to undo that is incredibly difficult, and it requires a lot of really unfortunate and painful experiences in order to even try. In my own experience with it, I remember being treated quite a lot like that all the way back there in the '60s. That I was, less than just because I was a boy. And because of that, I took that right up into my adulthood with me. And, like I said, the results were a whole lot worse than the events that I had to go through back then. And like I said, on a widespread basis, what we're gearing up for now is for all of that to become the norm, and for all of that to become the expectation in the education system, which is going to produce a whole world full of men like the man that I was. And like I said, that's we can't come back from that. If we hit that point, then it's too late, and we'll have to learn how to get along with a lot of things that we have all become very used to. We're humans, we can do that, but I would rather not. I would rather intervene now and prevent that from becoming everybody's future. And as I said, because at my age, I enjoy the luxury of knowing that I won't experience a lot of it because I'm not going to be here. Nobody lives forever. You know, but at the same time, I know enough about what it is like to know that things are bad now, but in the fairly near future, you know, they're going to become intolerable for everyone. You know, for everyone.
No, that actually makes sense. But I do believe that things might be better in one way, and the reason why is because because of all this, right? That means that it's very good to encourage the male populations to forsway any form of loyalty towards their country, right? Because if you are in a female supremacist state, right, this destroys itself, right? You should either make it stop being a female supremacist state, but as long as it is that way, the way that it should be doing is to see the destruction about any of those countries to collapse as a good thing, because if they are going to be that violating of people's rights, then those countries does not really deserve to exist, and because of that, I'm happy to see them fall, and I look forward to whatever can come after it. And also another thing that is occurring is that because of my generation, right? I know that most boys that I went to school with, like we are pretty much aware, or like very much aware that that we are like considered to be the appropriate target for hate, and we just have to tolerate it, and because of that, we become a little bit disincentivized to it. So if someone tells you that you are like a terrible person and don't deserve rights or whatever, you say like, yeah, I know that I've been taught this forever, right? You disagree with it, right? But the good is that you basically it's desensitized, which means that you can actually take a lot more and still come out more successful. And also, like the idea, if your society or your country isn't going to treat you with basic respect, then that society is going to lose all your talents, and you can just do all of that effort in order to improve yourself and found your own family, and then let the society and country go fuck itself. And if the country managed to fall, right, in my lifetime, even when I have my children, right, and that means that my children and my descendants would actually have a more prosperous future afterwards when it's done. Just wait out the collapse, and then we'll be better off.
I'm
I will be
weirded
stronger
out
to
by
protect
how
my family.
Um,
I'm weirded out by how many people are looking forward to the total collapse of Western civilization and the inherent mass starvation and annihilation of cultural values and the takeover of dictators and all of that that's going to come next, and just like giving it two big thumbs up, to be honest. It's very, very strange to me. People seem to think, if the country falls, that means we'll reset back to when it was good. And that's definitely not going to happen. The chances are that in 300-400 years we might be back to where we were. But it's
Right. If we don't
Sorry,
go
if
extinct.
you guys don't mind, actually, Dark wanted to say something. She actually tried to say something before, but she had some microphone problems. Katrina, are you there? Is your mic working now? Oh, okay, never mind. Keep going. Sorry.
okay then. Well, anyway, would somebody else like to chip in about their experiences?
I have something to say. It's about the intersection between gender and race, right? So, I think I mentioned this before, but basically, in the US, due to systemic discrimination against the African American community, and I guess also some other communities, a lot of young boys, they do have to grow up in how do I say, conditions that are not really ideal. So several of them end up getting, they don't really have the social support, right? So when I was looking at a study, and this was not really related to gender or anything, but one of the 5 biggest things that you need to enter university or increases the likelihood to enter university is a social support system which supports you going to university or going to college, right? That's very, very important, right? So a lot of these young boys, they don't really have the social support they need to enter university, right? For them, like entering college is like a really distant dream that they might not be able to, access. So a lot of them, to look for any sort of social support, they end up joining gangs or just being isolated, right? Which leads to them being less likely to go to university. Girls don't really have this burden because they're either very unlikely to join gangs, or when they do, they don't commit any actual crimes. They're just there for the socials, right?
Oh, I think they do commit actual crimes. In fact, I'm very, very sure of it because I've seen it happen. What I'm also
Oh,
sure about, though, is
okay.
that they have a much higher chance of getting away with it. What
Yeah,
often
true.
happens with gangs is that the girls will be the ones who call in the gang to beat someone up, and then the girls won't be blamed for it at all. The male members of the gang will, even though the girls orchestrated it.
Yeah, true.
I've had the girls do this to me, so I know for a fact that this is something that happens. But I've also seen quite a bit of evidence to suggest this is widespread. If anyone doesn't believe me, I suggest you ask a bouncer about this. Ask them who starts the fights. Ask them if the girls start the fights, because quite often the bouncer will be like, "Oh yeah, the girls start most of the fights. They'll set their boyfriends on each other, or they'll set their boyfriend on some other guy they don't like. They'll say that guy was perving on them or something, and the other, the boyfriend will go and beat the tar out of that guy." It's really, you've got to be aware of cat's paws, and you've got to be aware of how they're used. Cat's paws being another word for proxy violence. We carry on.
Yeah, so that's basically the point that I was trying to make, is that girls they remain like highly unaffected by like the consequences of joining a gang, which are several, right? So this leads to boys in impoverished backgrounds being less likely to go to college than girls from impoverished backgrounds. There was even a study I saw which suggested that girls from impoverished backgrounds were more likely to get out of poverty than boys were, right? And gang violence is one of the reasons, right? So what a lot of young men need, especially young men of color, is more good role models and more good support systems, right? A lot of girls do have good support systems, even from impoverished backgrounds, right? So, and like I said, like if you're a young impoverished boy and your school is just acting hostile to you, you might not want to stay in that situation. You'd rather go hang out with, your friends, or you might end up joining a gang. But if you're a girl, and school might even be fun for you, you know? So I feel like that's compounding the issue.
All of that is 100% accurate. I would just like to add a few things to it. And that is that there is one reason why specifically Black American boys are in this situation. It's also because they are disproportionately more likely to be raised by a single mother. And the reason why they are that way is because mothers who are poor, right, in America, they are more likely they don't get as much money or welfare to the same extent if they are living with the father or a stepfather to their children, which means that so the government makes sure to keep male influences over the children, and that is disproportionately affecting Black American boys in particular, more so than the other ethnicities. But there is a lot of other there's intersections of race and gender when it comes to boys of other races too. That I'm not going to say those are more severe or worse, I don't want to compare them. I just want to list them as well, so we have more information. And that is that if you look at a lot of scholarships, for example, that are restricted to certain races, that means that, and they aren't really, and also for women, right? That means that when it comes to, oh, you can have this if you are of this type of minority, right? Or you can have this if you're a woman. So if you are like a male American of European descent, then you are fewer scholarships opportunities than the others. But also, if you are an Asian male in America, then you are discriminated against when it comes to admissions, because they have affirmative action, which means that they have different sets for entry when it comes to universities in America, which means that if you are classified as black, you get affirmative action. And the white classification is like the neutral one, and the Asian is like negative point, you get discriminated against, right? You get less, you have even hard, you get more discriminated against than any other race in the United States. And if you're a boy, right, if you're Asian male, that means that you also, because you're a boy, you have less likely to get scholarships because of your gender. So I just want to add that too. It's very important. But your point is very valid. I'm really happy you brought that up, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to remember all this, because these are very important information.
Yeah, and I just want to say again, just to remind people, there is a myth, there is a misconception that the men's rights movement is only for white men or only for white boys. But just so it's very clear, the issues that we talk about, such as the education gap, affect men and boys of all races, of all nationalities, all over the world. And in fact, many men's issues are even worse for black men and black boys, or men of color. So it's a complete myth that men's issues
Exactly, like things like police brutality, things like the education gap, things like the healthcare gap. These things are, number one, worse if you're a guy. Number two, worse if you're a colored person. So like,
Yep.
it's like, you know, even if you look at the case of police brutality, like if you look like something like Black Lives Matter, right? Which I support. I'm a big supporter of it. They were talking about how like black people were 2.5 times more likely to get killed by a police officer, when men are 22 times more likely to be killed by a police officer. So like it's really bad, especially if you're a black man, you know. So even more than a white man, you know. So like these issues are really important to men who are of other races as well.
But I just want to add a very important information, and I don't think anybody should support the Black Lives Matter organization, because they literally state on their website that they are opposed to centering black men as victims of racism. They literally want to make a space free of male-centeredness, and I do believe that we should not support groups to do that for the black male population, because there are a lot of other pro-black
just
groups
really fast,
actually.
just really fast, I have to ask. So you're saying that on their website they're saying they are against having a separate space for black males, but do they advocate having a separate space for black females?
Yeah, they are literally saying that what they want to center an environment where they only center the experience. They literally want to rebuild a pro-black movement that only centers women and people who are of any other people who are LGBT and women. They don't care about the black straight male populations. And I believe we really, like, there are 2 videos made by Tree of Logic where she literally explained to everybody how she does not how the Black Lives Matter organization do not actually care about the black male population, like, at all. And like that is there's an LGBT group who is who believe in the idea that women are the primary victims of racism, and that the black male population actually are more of a problem than something that they care about. And there is on the website, and I can post a video where Tree of Logic have pointed all this out if you want to.
Also, when you look at the
I don't know if you guys have heard of a theory called double oppression or triple oppression, right? But basically, that theory was started by like some African American feminists or African American Marxist feminists, which basically said that if you're a woman and you're African American and you're LGBTQ, you're triply oppressed. But like if you're a woman and if you're a Black African American person, you're doubly oppressed, right? So I was kind of looking into this theory. And then there's also this one called like black male privilege. It's the same thing, right? So but like if you look at like the effects of racism, right? They mostly happen to like African American males more than African American females. Like I can just name a few, lifespan, for example, police brutality, another example, sentencing gap, another example, education gap, another example, being murdered, being lynched, like being victim of hate crime is more likely to happen to men than women, right? Especially like when you look at things like racial hate crimes, it was mostly happening towards men as opposed to women, right? And so like there's a lot of issues that, I kind of disagree with the concept of double oppression or triple oppression, because you'll actually find that it's also the same with like LGBTQ people. Like it happens much more if you're assigned male at birth person, right? So like if you're a gay man or a transgender women, they're still called like assigned male at birth because they were assigned male at birth, right? So that's I'm not saying that they are not real women or anything like that. I'm just saying they're assigned male at birth, right? So like if you're a gay man or transgender woman, you're more likely to be a victim of a hate crime than a lesbian woman or a transgender man who is assigned female at birth, so that kind of thing.
Build on your point. Can I be heard now, by the way?
Oh, I would also like to add is that there are a lot of parts of the Black Lives Matter website, they're literally saying how much they care about Black mothers, but they never talk about anything about caring about Black fathers. They literally have a paragraph where they say that they have a space where mothers and parents are included. Like they mention mothers specifically by name, but they never mention fathers specifically, right? And there's also says that that they want to center those marginalized in previous pro-Black movements, right? Which means that they're literally out to not center. They're like opposed to centering Black male victims of racism, or like they don't even center Black male victims Black men when it comes to proponents of their rights. And I do believe that racism and sexism in the Black male populations do actually kind of like intersect in a way, right? And that is an important issue, but the BLM movement is not the organizations who actually cared about solving that. And it's them themselves saying that on their own website. So I just wanted to add that. It's kind of, and I did link to the videos, and I hope everybody can see it.
What about Taz? Had something you'd like to say if you'd like to carry on with that?
Yeah, thanks, Ma. Yeah, I was discussing in the chat that, these current circumstances have an origin, with educators, policymakers, politicians, people in the media. It isn't only that their focus has been shifted to progress for women. It's been a focus that, men and boys are, we're violent, we're dangerous, we're, unpredictable, we're a problem, we're erratic, and that has a subconscious effect on, for example, a primary school teacher, handing out grades for assignments. And, it becomes something for them to have to overcome to be fair when they're grading. and they're, too many of them don't even realize that it's happening. But like I said, this is none of what is happening now is going to promote actual progress for women. What it's going to do is promote regression for men. And one particular problem with that in many communities in my country that we see is that when that is done, someone was bringing up Black Lives Matter and their erasure of Black men in their own community. What that does is creates, a self-fulfilling prophecy. What they start out assuming men and boys are is ultimately what we become. And as I've said, it becomes very difficult to impossible to undo it once it's done. It's a simple matter of human nature. We do end up becoming what we are expected to be. And in, small enclaves and communities in one country or another, it's currently a big problem. But it's going to go from being a problem to just the wallpaper. It will just be how things are everywhere. Regardless of what community you're in or what region of which country you're in, it'll just be that way. And like I said, at that point, who does one turn to correct that problem? There won't be anybody there because everyone that everyone has always turned to will be part of the problem. And like I said, it requires intervention now. It requires calling out and, very publicly demanding that men and boys be, seen as human, be seen as valid, and be seen as worthy of the effort that it's going to take to allow our boys to be educated so that they can grow into becoming men that are part of the solution instead of part of the problem. None of what we're talking about here is going to be easy to fix, and it's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to take away a lot of power from a lot of people that have most of the power right now. And, like I say, it's not all feminists. It's the current power structure. And a lot of people are going to end up, like I say, out in the cold. They're not going to like it. So what we're talking about to correct, this moral issue now is going to be an uphill battle. There are people wandering around out there who honestly believe that the status quo and the current condition in educating and supporting men and boys is the way it should be. They actually believe it because they can't see past the end of their nose, and they can't see what's around the corner. So, like I said, this kind of discussion, if there's no measurable, for lack of a better word, threat, of what is possible, then people don't have a good reason to do what it takes to change.
And I would also like to add to one thing is that it's also in the BLM policies that because an LGBT group, no Black straight men can ever hold leadership positions. So, like, if the issue, which it is an issue, which is racism and sexism, right? It doesn't really seem that the solution here ignore the male component, and also doesn't allow male leaders who are heterosexual to be a part of their organization is going to solve it. I really don't see that happening. Like, doesn't make sense to me. Especially if there are a lot of other pro-Black groups who actually do center male men within them too, right? Like if they are if it's an issue that primarily attacks men, and also black men in particular, right, then centering women isn't really going to help the men.
I do think that it's very profound that what Taz said, that attacking boys is going to create more problems, more of these like problem men, because from what I've seen, attacking boys is what turns them into violent shooters and things like that. It's we got to that position by getting rid of their dads. We got to that position by beating them down, and every little bit makes it more statistically likely that more and more of them are going to go off the train tracks. They're going to just continue and continue to try and find ways to hurt as many people as possible because they've been hurt so badly. And what we really need to do is realize what the common signs of like school shooters, and that is they don't have a dad, they're on medication for like often anxiety conditions and things. They're beaten down and things like that. Like they often have really awful, cruel lives. And what we really need to do is get in there before they go off the rails, because they're incredibly, they're not easy to spot necessarily, but it is a very preventable thing. And it's something that we can do an awful lot to stop. But nobody wants to, because that means helping boys.
I would also like to add to the previous topic. Previous thing is also that it's that the reason why a lot of men in America are being in altercation with the police, and why they sometimes die, and why they are failing to a certain extent. It's usually because they don't have a father in the house, usually because they're raised by single mothers, right? If you fix the issue with if fewer boys are raised by single mothers, if they weren't disincentivized from kicking out the man, right? Well, being more incentivized to be with their man, right? All people, I might add, right? Then there will be less male victims of police brutality, and especially black men who are victims of it more, right? And it's very important that this is on the BLM website, that they are trying to dismantle the nuclear family, right? And also against patriarchy. And I have sourced all this in the voice discussion, so you can look it up after one. So I don't really think that, like, if you want to fix an issue, then while promoting the reason for that issue's existence to a certain extent, it's not really going to solve anything for anybody.
They're also raving communists, but I think they took that off the website.
Yeah, but luckily the link I listed is about Tree of Logic, and she basically went to the website before they changed it, so she had like the original quotes and the original layout of the website, and that's in the link I listed. I can list it again if you want to. I should post in resources.
You can post the link in the chat as well if you want.
Okay.
Yeah. So, does anyone else have anything interesting to say about education? We've talked. I don't think we've really mentioned some of the things we talked about in the warm-up. If people want to bring some of those in.
I do have one thing to say about my experience with the education system.
Go on.
And that is that when I was in school, there was not in South Africa. This was in Europe, by the way. That when I was in school in Europe, they basically said, in what way do you think women are treated worse than men? Right? And I was like, but they aren't. Like, there wasn't even like an alternative you have to. They just assumed that was like a fact statement on a class I had, right? And they basically said that you're more likely to be victim of like sexual violence, and also two other things I don't remember, right? So it's like, that's how fucking stupid education system are. But luckily, the same school where the two other teachers actually said that they believe that men are actually the gender that get more negative discrimination in society. And so the school had both that and the other ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting that there are a bunch of teachers who are saying the reverse. I have to wonder if those teachers were more or less vocal about it, because I have a sense they were probably not as vocal as the teachers who believed that girls had it worse.
Yeah, exactly. The thing is, there are consequences to saying that a particular group is the oppressor group or the privileged group, because then you'll act to help the unprivileged or the oppressed group, right? So, like, let's say, for example, in this case, we say that men are the oppressor group and that women are the oppressed group, yeah? So teachers and people in general, they're going to have, they're going to try and do some things to make women more comfortable, because they're like, oh, poor dear, you're so oppressed, let me do what I can to help you. That kind of like, I don't know if there's a term for it, but like there's that kind of thing. And like as a woman, like I just find it so annoying. Like I don't view myself as oppressed at all, especially because of my gender. But anyway, that's my own personal opinion, right? But what I'm trying to say is that there are consequences to labeling men as the oppressor class and women as the oppressed class, because then they're going to have these programs where they teach boys, like for example, not to not hit girls. And like they'll tell them, did you realize that when you were growing up you were taught that it's okay to hit girls, but now we're telling you that that's actually not okay, and that actually, we're living in like an oppressive patriarchal society that hates women. So you've been taught to beat girls, but we're telling you, like, we're the only ones telling you that it's not okay, when like boys have literally been told their whole life not to hit girls, their whole life. So like for example, there's this program, I don't know if it's Red Ribbon or some other program, like they were giving these boys these really loaded questions. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of this logical fallacy called loaded question, but so like they asked them, like, legit, like no joke, one of the questions they asked the boys, do you realize that you've been taught that women are property? And this wasn't in like a rural village in Iran or something. This was in modern day USA, To say that like boys are being taught to view women as property in modern day USA is insane, right? But this program was going around teaching boys, like this has have to have like some negative effect on these boys who are legit just being taught that they're so privileged and the girls are so oppressed, even when that's not even true. That's not even true at all. So that's another issue that comes up when boys are like in schools. So that's of course going to interfere with their education, because they're being told that anytime they do excel in something, it's because of privilege. So yeah, basically.
Yeah, this concept of privilege is a really insidious one. It really loads the entire conversation, and basically it's about saying that my voice is more important than yours because have arbitrarily decided that I'm less privileged, and I have defined it in such a way that you cannot object to it, and I have so much power that if you do try to object to it, you're out of this college or you're out of this job or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I'll just give you a quick example that illustrates what I'm talking about. So I was reading this article. I think it was about Sweden, right? So in Sweden, like before, maybe in the history, maybe men were more likely to go to college than women, but like for a long time now, that hasn't been the case. Women are much more likely to go to university than men. However, like in the past, they said, let us have a gender quota, right, to make sure that more women go to university. So you are only allowed to accept a number of female or a number of male students, right? So to make it like more even, right? However, there are a number of degrees right now which say that women are more likely to enter a certain field than men, right? So because of that gender quota, it was mostly girls being rejected than boys, right? Which makes sense because like if a certain college is sorry not college if a certain course's gender ratio is 80% women applicants 20% male applicants, to make it 50-50 they'll have to reject most or a big number of female applicants, and then they will have to accept like mediocre male applicants or something like that, right? So because of this, some women actually sued like some universities, and then you know what they did? They literally reversed the gender quota. Now there's no gender quota, but only for the ones that are female dominated. For the ones that are male dominated, they still have to accept both male and female applicants in equal numbers, which means maybe there's a woman who is not, of course, not like a insult to women or anything, but there might be a woman who's like maybe not as good as some random male applicant, but because he's a male, he's going to be rejected, you know. But basically, the standards are being lowered for women in male-dominated fields, but in the female-dominated fields, they can now accept as many women as they want, which is, of course, I don't even have to tell you how this is bad for men who want to become educated, of course.
Like, I would also like to add to this, all this true, I would also just like to add one thing, and that is that when it is like a lot of these fields that are male dominated in Sweden, it tend to be that it will be very few female applicants, right? So even when they have, a lot of people might say, but if there is affirmative action discrimination against men, then why are men still the majority? Well, that is because even though when men are the majority, they still have affirmative action for women, right? But because there are so few women applicants, right, that means that those women would, so therefore, all the women who apply would therefore be accepted, right? Because there's a few of them, right? And therefore, they will still be less than 50% in that course. But because they have affirmative action, because they're the minority, all of them got in, and the male ones did not get in.
I think it's also interesting to note that, like, even with all this affirmative action, men are still dominant in doing the most well-paid jobs and that kind of thing. That even with such an amount of like such a giant hill to climb, men are still trying to climb it when women get all the pushes and all the things going their way and help that they need, then it's kind of crazy to think
Almost,
about
Yeah,
that.
almost.
like I'll give you
and
an example.
then it's really
of this.
important it's really important to think about the men that don't succeed because of this pushback. That is,
Yeah,
because those men get left behind.
the thing is, like, I was actually, my country of Kenya is like number 140 or something on the gender equality index, or the gender gap in the name of that index, if you know it, right? So I was so shocked at this because, like, from all the statistics that I've looked at, like, we're not bad off. Domestic violence isn't extremely high. It's not accepted. It's not socially acceptable at all, or at least against women. Rape is not something that's acceptable at all. Child marriage is something that doesn't happen that often. Women are going to university. There's nothing that women can't do in Kenya. So, like, I was questioning myself, like, why is it so low? And then I actually went and checked, and I realized one of the reasons that we're so low is because women are less likely to be employed than men in Kenya. This doesn't mean that women are starving or anything like that. There is some poverty in Kenya, I will admit. However, the majority, like 88% of the homeless here are men, right? That's in Kenya, right? So, like, you know what the actual issue is? The actual issue is that so many women in Kenya, they literally become homemakers after they get married of their own choice. Nobody's forcing them or anything. But it's a very common thing in Kenya for a woman to like work and up until the time she gets married. Then if she gets married, like she becomes a homemaker, right? But that in itself is not a sign of oppression. So of course, if you say that, you know, women are less likely to have full-time jobs than men, that's why they're oppressed, then that literally means that in almost every single country in the world, or in so many countries in the world, women are going to be seen as oppressed, when it's not really a sign of oppression. Like, if anything, it's a sign of privilege, because you actually have the choice to either work or not work. Like, why is
Yeah.
it being taken as
I
a sign
think
of privilege? You know,
I
so
think we need a
yeah.
better index. We need to come up with our own index and try to
Yeah,
measure
there
by
is
that.
one. Go look at this thing called the basic inequality. Sorry, I think it's basic index of gender inequality, BIGI. That one actually took many more factors into consideration, such as lifespan, you know, how likely you are to be physically attacked. And they found that women are more privileged than men in 70% of countries, you know. So that's why I like, and I was like, you know what, that checks out. You know, like, it does check out, you know. So like, you know, the thing is, women and men have different goals, you know, in what they want to do. Men are more competitive naturally, so they might want to have, you know, they might really strive for their top position. But you know, their top position, it might involve you working 60, 70 hours a week. But women might want to have a more balanced lifestyle, one where they can work on their job at a certain number of hours, and then work, or rather not work, but spend time at home in a different hours. Like, I'm not just saying this. This is stuff that I've seen in studies. There's a researcher called Catherine Hakim. She was talking about it, you know, and found that actually a big number of, or not a big number, a big part of this gender gap, or this gender wage gap, is explained by women's choices, you know. So, and that's not a bad thing. I don't have a problem with it unless it interferes with women's happiness, which it doesn't, because women are more satisfied at their workplaces than men are. So, you know,
Women
I
are
don't
more
have a problem.
satisfied in general, but yeah.
Exactly. You know, so my goal as a feminist is not to have women having to be 50% of everything, you know. I just want, like, women to be able to make their own choices, you know, and be happy because of their choices. It's not that big of a deal to me if there are more male CEOs, when I know those male CEOs probably, to get to that job, they would have to work like 60, 70, 80 hours per week, which most women would not be comfortable working, you
Yeah,
know.
and they're likely
So
gonna
like,
have wives.
yeah, exactly.
To go back slightly, something that we really should acknowledge is that these studies into gender equality tend to be entirely focused on female inequality, and very much in the sense that they define female inequality in a very particular way, very deliberately, in order to make them look more oppressed than they actually are. I mean, it was mentioned that like all this household stuff it's not really oppression. Really, oppression would be if you're banned from the workplace entirely, not that you've got the choice to work from home or work on your home and just be a homemaker, or go to work at a company. That's not oppression. That's just having more choices than men do by a factor of, I'm not even sure, three, I think it is. But the uh, the real thing we need to really address is that when that quality inequality index came out, if it's what I'm thinking of, it got a lot of blowback because it included a lot of things that men suffer as well. So it's very much a deliberate thing that they're doing here, I think.
Yeah, but like I would like to add something to the whole of the intersectional discrimination when it comes to between race and gender, when it comes to how men are sort of discriminated not just because of their gender, but because of their not because of their gender, but because of also their race, right? And because of that, right? And I do believe that happened to. And only because I admit it happened to one race doesn't mean that I also don't acknowledge it happens to another race too, right? Because I do know that that in South Africa, I do know that there are affirmative action for anybody who is black and discrimination against all the people who are minorities when it comes to education. And because and but it's not just discrimination based on your race. If you are a minority, you get discriminated against. But if you are a male minority, you get double discriminated against because of your gender too.
Well, that's just a bingo right there. Yeah.
Pardon?
But it's. I think most of the issues coming from, well, if we look at the U.S., I think most of the issues are more class based than race based specifically. I mean, most of the U.S. is a very racially and diverse country, ethnically diverse as well. So it's they've kept back a lot of their population to the more poorer strata of their of their of their positions, social positions. But yeah, well,
Well, there's also like, but what I was more like, I just want to ask to ask if it was clear. Like, I would also like to first like to say that if people have if there is a lot of help for people of certain races or women to get out of economic situation, then even if it's based on class, doesn't that mean that the men of certain races or will have a harder time getting out of that because they are discriminated against as though they were in an upper class?
Exactly. That's one of the reasons why in the study that I looked at least in the US, it's easier for girls to get out of impoverished class than it is for boys, because girls, by virtue of them being women and by virtue of them being minority, they're seen as like the most oppressed people on earth. So they're given like all these programs and everything, and I definitely approve of these programs. I'm not saying I'm against them, right? So like for example, a female minority might be more likely to receive a scholarship because there's so many scholarships just for women and just for minorities, right? And she might be able to benefit from more welfare, more shelters, more like women, infants, and children programs, So there's a lot, and by virtue of her being a minority and by virtue of her being female, there'll be special places reserved for her in university, right? Which means that she's more likely to enter those university than maybe a boy who's having his own issues, but because he's a man, he's just seen as privileged.
yeah.
Something that I've wondered about quite often is what sort of races are considered to be in need of affirmative action in black countries. I think that'd be quite an interesting thing. Well, we don't really, it's not off topic completely, but I'd just be quite
I don't think they have
interested.
affirmative action in those countries. Yeah.
Well, actually,
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Jay.
actually, they kind of do because in South Africa there is like there is like a system where you it's a very racist system where they have affirmative action for black people who are not immigrants, who are like above like 80, or like less than 80, like around 80% of the population, right? And all the minorities who are not black, which includes people who are colored or mixed race, and Malay, Indian, Chinese, or those of European or Middle Eastern descent. Like all these people I listed, they don't get affirmative action because they are not black, right? And they are only 20% of the population. And there is also an intersection, and there is also discrimination because if you are a woman, you also get affirmative action, but you get mainly because of your race and then for your gender, right? So the women get more than the men, and the minority men get like they're like the victim of institutional racism in an intersection way with their gender, because they are discriminated against for their male gender and also for their for their race. So that's how it works. And it's really bad because it leads to a lot of men in the minority situation have very hard to get out of poverty when they are in poverty. Because they're minorities, they don't get help by the government.
Yeah, so they even get a step back, basically.
Yeah, and it's like one of the most racist like system there is in the world. It's like you're a minority, that means that you get less rights just because democracy, I suppose. And if you're a man, you get even less rights. But that's kind of like the racial division is more negatively impacting people. The gender is less profound, but it still is there, so it's important to mention. And it is actually a human rights violation to have it that way. And this actually might just be an anecdote. I also like to say that that this actually occurs in other countries that have affirmative action for the majority. That is the case in Malaysia too, but that's like besides the point. Because I would also like to ask, not really ask, but just like state that I do like that there are programs to help people, and I like that. Like I don't oppose that women are getting helped, right, or that any particular race are getting helped. But it should be that if there is a government-funded program that helps people, they should have to accept all people. They shouldn't just. They can, of course, say that if you are rich, then you're not going to help you, of course, right? But they should also say that they should not exclude people based on their race, because if people of the same race or different ethnicities, people of different ethnicities are both in the same situation, right? They are poor, and they want to get an education, and they are good in school, right? But one gets only help because the country only value them because of their race and their gender, right? And the other ones, they can go fuck themselves.
Yeah, but also,
and therefore they should include those people as well. Otherwise, they're just placing these men and these people of certain ethnicities in a situation where they have a harder time to get out of there.
I would just like to mention one last thing when it comes to boys' education. Now, there is one thing that interferes with boys' education, especially in developing countries, and that is child labor, right? Child labor affects over 100 million children around the world, right? Currently. And a majority of those are boys. At least 60% of those are boys, right? Now, that is not the only thing, right? Because that is just child labor in general. When it comes to extreme child labor or really difficult or rather, let me just say hazardous child labor, it is 66 boys, 66% boys, right? And only a third girls, right?
Yeah, if we look at abuse, then boys are major victims. They're put out on the streets. They're put to work. They're just abused more outright.
Yeah. So now because of that, especially in countries like Iran, Afghanistan, boys are I think over 90% of extreme laborers, like the one who works as a little construction worker. I don't even know how they're allowing a kid on a construction worker as a construction worker, but they are. One story I read is that like an Afghani boy who's as young as 6 years old can be working as a construction worker to as to help his family, right? Which is heartbreaking. But that boy should be in school, right? So that is another issue that is affecting boys' education in developing countries, right? Um, Child labor, of course, interferes with your education because you can't be working, as a construction worker and going to school at the same time. You can't be selling things on the street when you're supposed to be in school, right? So these boys, they end up, working as child laborers. And one thing I will just throw in, not really related to education, but many of them are also at risk of being sexually assaulted, especially in countries like Iran and Afghanistan, where rape of little boys is seen as something that's normal, so they're at risk of being sexually assaulted while maybe their sisters are at home being looked after by their families, right? And I will just add that it is a little bit skewed because on some of these surveys that will calculate child labor and specifically between boys and girls, a girl making tea for her family and a boy, going and working in a hazardous environment, they're taken as the same thing, in some of these surveys, which is so it makes it looks like that girls are even more likely to be child laborers than they actually are, I mean, like, okay, it depends because like I'm an Asian girl, right? And like making tea for your family or like doing some chores around the house, it wasn't that big of a deal and it didn't interfere with my education, but like obviously if you're working on the street or if you're working as a construction worker or whatever as a boy or you work in a fishery, then it's going to affect your education a lot more,
Yeah,
so yeah.
if you have to spend more than half a day working, then it's gonna
Yeah,
affect your education.
so in short, child
Yeah,
labor
lots of
mostly
them
affects
vanish.
girls.
A lot of them do vanish. You did mention the sex trade, Bakabazi, I think it's called, which is the boy rape slave thing that they have, which is very traditional in places like Afghanistan and the rest of the Middle East, where they'll use boys as dancers and then they'll rape them and then they'll use them as suicide bombers. So that kind of affects their education, I guess.
It's also a fact that in Afghanistan, because of the Sharia law, that when a woman, if the man dies because of all the violence, right, and because of bad work conditions and all that, that means that that if a boy is like a little kid, right, he's like 13, right, and then he actually legally and socially obligated to support his family, right, including his mother, right, regardless of her education status. That means that that he must work when he's 13 because he doesn't have a dad, even though he have a mother because of the Sharia, right? And that means that he might often sell himself as a sex slave, not sex slave, but like as a prostitute, for other men, right? So that he can support his family, including even though his mother is like alive and well and all that, right? And they are like, and then the Western media is completely ignoring this. And even though they ignored it, I think it was police, I'm not sure, the military, who actually were raping boys because they didn't want to take away the virginity of women or girls because they were going to get married when they to someone, right? So therefore, no, we can't rape the girls. We're gonna rape the boys because if we're gonna rape someone, it's better to rape the boys. And the Western media know about this. They just ignored it because it didn't fit their narrative.
Yeah, and it's also very much ignored that boys are locked into child marriages. They'll marry a young boy off to a girl or an older woman. And if it's an older woman, then the chances are the boy has to then go out, drop school, go out, get a job, and work for a living to support her, this grown woman who's old enough to be his mother.
These kinds of, very ignored and silenced current state activities and injustices, probably a really good thing to bring into a discussion about upcoming International Men's Day, because even among ourselves here, still being shocked and upset by the way things are now. We have to remember that we are aware of the way things are now because we've been paying attention, and most people are not. And International Men's Day is probably a good time to shock and upset, some normies.
For me, I didn't know like a lot of this stuff was happening to boys in Middle Eastern countries.
Exactly.
That is very shocking to me. That all of this stuff, for me, I thought it was more, at least based upon what I've been taught. Now, obviously, I'm getting educated now about these things, but I didn't know, because I always thought it was more skewed, like whenever it comes to like sexual violence, I thought it was more skewed towards the female side rather than the male side. But boy, am I surprised by all of this.
No, women are
does
just
shock
generally much more protected than you think. It's
Yeah. The thing is, like, it's where Adam's girl, I talked about the concept of male invisibility, and I think Tin Men talked about it on his Instagram page. But basically, the whole reason, or rather part of the reason why we think that women are so oppressed and men have it so good, is because people are really, really, really blind to men's issues, right? And they really, really, really don't report on them. So like let me give you an example to illustrate what I'm talking about. If you sit on your computer and you're reading news articles, and like every single day you're just being lambasted, with headlines like 15 people killed, including 3 children and 1 woman. You're gonna be like, oh, 3 whole women killed, that's horrible. When they didn't even mention the number of men that got killed, right? And
Yeah.
you'll see, for example, like 3 articles. Like, for example, take the Sarah Everard case. They were reporting on that case for a really, really long time, which is good. Of course, what happened to her was horrible. But in that same week that she died, at least 3 or 4 men died, including, like, 1 really young male student, I believe, But those articles or those deaths were not given that much attention, right? So, like, there was even a study which showed that men, when a man goes missing, it generates 3 times as less news attention than when a missing woman
Yep.
or rather when a woman goes
That is
missing.
very
And
true.
they actually have a name for this. It's missing white woman syndrome. So like people were really, really upset about the white part. They're like, why are you ignoring colored women when they are fine with the woman part? Like missing men don't get any type of attention at all when they're around half of the people who go missing, right? Or just under half of the people who go missing, right? So like if you look at like how Boko Haram was being reported, it was like they were trying to tell people that Boko Haram is like an extremely misogynistic patriarchal group who hates girls and wants to take them out of school, and that's why they're kidnapping these girls. So obviously people around the world, they're going to be like disgusted. They're going to be like, wow, like this world really hates women. You're telling me these grown men are like arming themselves just so that they can get girls out of schools, you know? But like the fact is that's not even true. They don't hate girls in particular. Like their whole thing is that like Western education in general is bad, right? And there have been many, many
Mm-hmm.
times when they went like to a girls, sorry, not to a girls, to a university where they attacked the male dormitories and literally set the boys on fire, or they slit their throats while leaving the girls one completely left alone, or when they
That's
would go to
crazy.
school. Yeah, and like you can go look this up. There was a college, like an agriculture college, where there were 4 male dormitories and one, well, I guess because there's more male students in agriculture, and they I think they set fire, or they set fire to the 4 male ones, and they left the female one completely alone. Like they specifically targeted the male one. I can even share a link. It's called the Goja Massacre, or I'll just get the link for you guys so that you can see it. And there was even a time when they would go to a school that had a unisex school, and they would literally let the girls go, and they would slit the throats of the boys, and or set them on fire. So like if there's any sex that they're specifically targeting, it's boys, not girls. But like they're still being shown as like a misogynist group that like hates girls and wants girls to not be educated. So like obviously, like
I know in some Middle Eastern countries there's like this there's a lot of, I know in some of them, not all of them, but I know that there's like a lot of trafficking that happens for both
yes,
genders.
exactly.
Yes,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
both of them. And here, like, I'm not gonna like bring up like the name of it because I don't want to mispronounce it of what it's called. But basically, like for a lot of like this is like for a lot of boys, they get I know in one country they basically dress the boys up in like they dress the boys up and they like do their makeup and everything.
Yeah,
And yeah.
Yeah, that's what it's called. So it's really bad.
Yeah.
Well,
And
isn't it interesting to
Yeah.
have such violence committed to boys and we still focus on, oh no, women can't go to school?
Exactly,
That's our focus. I mean,
yeah,
I do wanna be like, we should talk about it to a degree,
of course,
but if there's literally people dying on the streets, why are you so focused on women getting education?
I would be less
That sounds
concerned
like an
over
obsession.
women. I honestly, and this is just me, I hate how this is going to sound, but I'm sorry. But I would be less I'm much less concerned over, over the education thing more than human beings being killed. Like that I hate that sounded, but unfortunately it had to come out that way.
No,
Like,
that's, I mean, that's actually, a valid statement. I mean, you said it yourself that you had to come here to this kind of, shadowy corner of the internet just to find out the truth. I mean, that's not your fault. I mean, there are, very powerful groups of people working diligently without rest to make sure that none of what we're talking about here ever meets the light of day. I mean, make no mistake. Like I said, this is not, none of what we're talking about here is a mistake or a result
not, no.
of ignorance or anything like that. All of what we're talking about here is very much on purpose. And our job should be to produce a counter threat narrative that just simply points out that if this continues the way it is, at some point there won't be anything anyone can do about it.
There's already been casualties from the feminist lie.
And here's the thing, though. But here's the thing, like whenever it comes to like the societal issues and them like constantly, I'm saying like the toxic way that we view, the toxic view of feminism. They keep saying like kill all men, kill all men, and like There was one Australian school that basically took all the boys and made them stand up in the middle of class and made them apologize just for being boys.
And then the Australian government
Just-
also gave money to Clementine Ford to write an article about COVID doesn't kill men enough, rather than to help the men who are actually laid off because of
Yeah.
COVID. So I think
Right.
the Australian government doesn't really give a shit about the male population, and they shouldn't give a shit about the government either.
At least
I'm
Gladys
not
Barry, she cleaned.
I'm not sure if this is true, but like apparently like the Australian government is now saying like there's like an issue with the masculinity, and they're naming like masculinity as one of the things that I don't know is bad or something. Like I don't know, like people were talking about it on the other subreddits, you know. But basically what I was trying to say to Adam's girl and to Kaz and to Krita, basically like it's simple logic, right? Like imagine if you're constantly every single day lambasted with stories about how there's this gender gap, women are not enough TV guests, or you know like women are not, you know, women are getting hurt. This one woman, she got hurt in this one city. You know, if you're constantly lambasted with stories about like women getting hurt or women being like less likely to do this, you know, which is sort of implying that they're just actively being discriminated against, rather than, you know, maybe women just having different interests than men or something like that. You know, then you're obviously going to believe
Which
that,
there's
you know,
nothing
women
wrong
are-
with that.
Exactly, you know, and there's
There's
nothing wrong with
nothing
that.
wrong with having, and honestly, like, you know, a woman that chooses to be a stay-at-home, you know, that chooses to be a stay-at-home parent, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing misogynistic. There's nothing sexist about it. Just
I mean,
it-
having a
it's
single
because it's your choice.
having a single earner household hasn't really been viable for a very long time. It's usually that women take on side jobs part time at least, and it's been happening
Yeah.
throughout history.
But yeah, but like
There hasn't been
basically,
no time that women weren't allowed to work. So
exactly.
it's- yeah.
Like, and there,
You know?
and honestly, there's nothing wrong with being a homemaker. I just want to stress that there's nothing wrong with being a homemaker.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
exactly. And you know what, basically what I was trying to say is that like if you're constantly lambasted every single day with articles talking about, you know, how women are oppressed, or about how women are getting hurt, or about how women are the victims of violence, like oh my God, like there was this BBC article. It was so shady. Like oh my, I just have to laugh. I just have to tell you guys about it
That
because
makes
it's
women
so
sound
funny.
even.
No.
You know,
wait.
You know what? Do you know what's bad though? That makes women sound and look so bad as well, because it paints them out as weak human beings, which they're not. We're stronger than you think, and
Exactly.
that's
But like
it.
you know,
It's
like
backfiring.
let me just tell you about this BBC article, and I swear it is so shady. When I tell you this story, I think most of you are just going to laugh. But like there was this BBC article that was talking about like women being victims of violence or whatever. And like in this graph, like and I think you know that the BBC knows that people are just going to like scroll through, that they won't read all of the details. But like in the first graph, in the first graph of the article, they literally had men as the pink line and women as the blue line, which is fine, right? And of course it showed like and the graph was about victims of violence in general, right? So it showed that the pink line is 4 times higher than the blue line, because men are 4 times more likely to be victims of violence according to that table, right? So of course maybe some people, when they're just scrolling by, they'll say, oh, pink line equals women, so women are more likely to be victims of violence. Now you could tell me, oh,
That was
Dija,
crafty.
no, you know, maybe no, just listen, it gets so much worse. Like, you know, maybe you could tell me, oh, Dija, come on, maybe they're just trying to say it's okay for men to like pink and women to like blue, which I'd agree with you. I mean, if you read the article wrong, like then that's on you. But literally when they went to table 2, where they were talking specifically about victims of sexual assault, they changed the colors. so, so now women with a pink line and men with a blue line, just so that they could show the pink line was above the blue line again. Like, it's so shady. Like, I had to laugh. Like, it was so funny to me. Like, it was
Honestly,
legit so funny.
this thing is just like the whole media, the whole like social media is just so satirical sometimes. It really is. It's satirical.
I can even share the article. Like, they literally switched the colors just so that they could make it look like women are more likely to be victims of violence and sexual violence than men are. Like, it's so shady. That article was like, it's so funny. Like, honestly, you'll just laugh when you read that article. Like, it's so funny.
You know,
I
if
want
it's
also
the BBC, then you can complain to them about it, and you can possibly get it changed.
but may
I
I just
won't
like
bother because, like, you know.
They
I
do
would
have to respond to
I've got some information about because of the topic, how boys have been treated in education, right? And I actually have an example of a guy I know, right? He is in Malaysia, right? And I did tell you how the Malaysian they're discriminating against the minorities in Malaysia, right? And that includes the Chinese minority in Malaysia, right? So the Chinese and also that is double, because if you go to a Chinese school, right, as a Chinese boy in Malaysia, right, a lot of the teachers there are very, very, very anti-male in their behavior. Like, a lot of the women teachers are allowed to be very, very abusive and mistreating the male Chinese students, right? So
Mm-hmm.
go to education, right? And that is like so it's like so that is the case for minorities in Malaysia. They're discriminated against for being minorities when it comes to education, higher education, and in lower education, if there are their own schools, then the teachers of their own ethnicity would discriminate against them for being boys. And that's like the guy I was talking to. He told me that when he was a kid, right, the teachers were like bullying the boys, right? They were like saying, they were pitching them against each other and always make it so that the girls appeared better, right? And they were like abusive towards the male students.
Which is stupid.
Yeah, and it's also an example of an intersectional discrimination based on boys for their race, right? In the sense when it comes to application later, right? But also when they are children because of their gender. So it's like it's like the double, if that makes sense.
Hey guys, do you guys mind sending me like more articles of like boys that are like of human trafficking, like amongst boys? Do you guys mind sending me like a couple of links for that?
You study, yeah, about
Sure,
it.
if I have some.
Because
There was this. Yeah, sorry.
I was going to
because
say,
there
oh, go ahead.
because there is there's actually a place about an hour away from us where I live, where there is a shelter for both men, for both boys and girls that are victims of sex trafficking. It's a Christian ran organization, and so I'm thinking about making TikToks for trafficking. So, like, in talking about these subjects, more specifically for boys.
You know, using social media that way to put it in people's faces is always a good thing. You know, like I said, upcoming International Men's Day is another opportunity to do that. The only downside for all of this is that too many people, you know, they are allowed and encouraged to convince themselves that all of these things we're talking about here happen, you know, outside of their life, you know, and people have this tendency, you know, to kind of disregard or turn away from anything that isn't, you know, right in front of them in their own life. But one thing we can always tell people is that, you know, whether it's trafficking or education or disregard for what happens to men and boys in other parts of the world, that regardless of how far away it is from you personally, you know, if you have children, if you suppose you're going to have grandchildren, if things don't change, you're marching those children into hell. And at some point, there won't be anything, you know, won't be anything available to correct it. You know, and then say, look,
So
you know,
just
we
be careful.
we can keep going the way we are, and you can keep ignoring this. But if you love your kids at all, you know, change your mind, like now, today, not tomorrow,
Like
not
protect.
after it's too
You know
late.
what? You know what? Protect your boys too.
Yep.
It's not like protect your sons, protect your daughters, protect everybody, because everybody's a victim of human trafficking. Everybody.
A very disturbing example I have of this is that in certain mainland Southeast Asian countries, where they're literally castrating and penectomizing boys in order to make them sex slaves, so they will appear as female.
I haven't even heard of that. Have you got a link to that or anything?
Not now, but I can find it later, and then I will send it to you when I have it in a few days.
Please do.
That's crazy. Oh, the world we live in, guys, the world we live in.
Yeah, I've got to say that's going to be an interesting one to send to the people who say that men don't have their genitals mutilated to the level girls do.
Like male,
literally happens to almost every single boy. Like at least a third of boys have been circumcised. Like what are they talking about?
like if
Oh
you
my
even
God.
even if you like look at it, like, you know how many countries there are, like dozens of countries where female genital cutting is illegal, as it should be, I might add, right?
Every single country, I think. I don't think that there's a single country where it's still allowed, if I'm not wrong.
I do believe that you are about to have a hoodectomy in Tunisia and Lebanon, but I do also believe that that is like less invasive than a circumcision of boys. So the law allows it, but it's equal to the way you can circumcise boys and girls the same way, because all laws in Tunisia are required to be gender neutral. And Tunisia is actually the only country in the world where all laws are identical to both genders, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I will also
Yeah.
I will also like to add that the only two countries where male for example, in South Africa, it is illegal to alter the genitals of your sons unless you do it because of a religious reason. Like if you decided because of my religion I can do it, then you can do it. But if you don't have a religion, you cannot do it. However, a lot of Xhosa boys are pressured into getting circumcised at 16 so that they wouldn't risk being disowned, and that is less clinical, which means that a lot of those boys lose their dicks when they are 16, and then they can never like have sex or anything like that afterwards. And that one person who was actually the victim of forced circumcision as a teenager was actually Nelson Mandela, and a lot of people don't know that.
Why does this remind me of an old episode of Shameless? That topic.
It does, because it's very, very similar to that. But I would have to need to finish my point, and that is that I think that Slovenia is the only country in the world where male genital cutting is not legal. So, yeah, it's like people say male genital cutting doesn't happen. It's like it's illegal to a certain extent everywhere except in one single country.
I thought in the UK, but the UK's national health system basically made it made it less of a preference, like because the UK implemented their system and the doctors were just like, well, there's no medical benefit to it, so we're not gonna have it under the NHS. And then basically most of Europe just doesn't have a circumcision as their mandate, but it is very much present in the United States, even though it's technically that your doctor needs to get permission from you in most states. Which
Yeah,
is
at least
kinda
from your
weird.
parents, not for the
Yeah,
child.
oh no, from you, but yeah, no, from the parents, from the primary, or the legal guardians in that sense.
Like I
Yeah,
actually
a lot of the times the doctor also tricks the parents into it. It's just like, oh no, it's a normal
Yep.
procedure. It's just
Happens often.
it's healthy.
and they
Healthier.
also really harass it. A lot of women that have if they have like a bad birth, like they basically are exhausted and they basically have a lot of pain
Oh,
and
yeah.
blood loss, right? They
Or-
will like harass these mothers to do it. They will
Yeah.
ask like 3 or 4 or 5 times, right? Knowing that she's in a mental state that she isn't really up to making those decisions, even though she shouldn't be able to make the decision anyway.
And if even threatened with refusing medical care if they didn't do it, that kind of stuff.
God.
Like that it's just so wickedly vile.
And I will also like to add that I would actually say that this circumcision, right? That is actually a form of human trafficking. I would actually say, because you're literally chopping off people's body parts of the small body parts, right? And then you are making cosmetic product of. You're literally harvesting human parts of people just because of their gender, right? In a country like the United States, and then selling it.
Disgusting.
And the victim doesn't even get compensated for it, right? Even if it's something happened to it, because I've talked to several American boys who have bad erections, right? Because they can't have erection. The erection is painful, and they cannot really. The sex is also painful, and some, or like all erections are painful, right? And some even bleed if they try to have sex. And actually, some examples are so severe that they actually have to medicate away erections because it's too painful to have one, if that makes sense.
You know,
Ouch.
I was watching Blue Orange 22's video, debate with this guy. I don't know what his name is, and then he was saying, you know, I don't see circumcision as oppression. I'm circumcised and I'm fine with it, which is great. But there were many men that I've seen who legitimately have problems with the fact that they were circumcised, and I'm just going to share a little bit of a story. I have a male best friend, right? And he's been circumcised, right? And in Kenya, it's extremely common. I think it's like 90, almost over 90% of men here have been circumcised, right? So, and he's part of the Kikuyu tribe, and the Kikuyu tribe, they even have a particular insult which translates to uncircumcised man. So here, it's literally seen as a derogatory thing to be a man and not be circumcised. You're taken as a child or as someone who is uncivilized or that kind of thing. It's a really, really, really big thing for a man to be circumcised here. Like they say that you're not a man until you've been circumcised, right? So the boys here get circumcised at 14 when they're in grade 8, right? When they're in grade 8. And thankfully, a lot of them do use an anesthetic, but some of them unfortunately don't. Like in some rural communities, they don't have any sort of anesthetic and they just do it, and it's extremely painful. Like it made me shudder to think about it. But like my best friend, he went through it, and I have no idea what happened. There was some issue with his procedure. So, graphic details here. They had to inject several injections into his genitalia, right? And basically,
Ouch.
he was, I know, right? Like they were basically like explaining that it was supposed to go numb, but it just wasn't going numb for him. It just wasn't. So like they had to inject him with like 4, and it still wasn't going numb. So they were like, let's just do it anyway. So like he was like still feeling everything, and like he couldn't move because like if someone's holding like your genitals in their hand, you don't want to be moving or squirming in case they like they really mess you up, right? So he had to like stay there still and like basically petrified, you know, and they like cut him, you know, and then finally like after they did is when it's when the anesthetic started working. So so he was fine after it because that is when it went numb. But like during the procedure itself, he was feeling everything, and that was like so horrifying for me to hear. And then like in the weeks after that, you know, because like after you've been circumcised, you need to be stitched, right? So like it's really important for you that you don't get like you don't get an erection after you get circumcised because the stitches will break, right? So like, and he was telling me that he was having trouble because, you know, like having an erection is pretty normal for a guy, like especially like in the morning, you know, it's just a natural thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're like or you're aroused or anything. It's just a natural thing. So he was having trouble with that, you know. So this is a really, really complicated procedure that's not even good.
This might be a good time to segue into talking about the leaflets, because we haven't mentioned them yet. Taz said something earlier about segueing them, but we didn't actually do it.
This would be a
What are
good
these
time.
leaflets you're talking about? Tell
Okay,
us more.
so Men Are Human, our organization, has gone and we have gotten a graphic designer to design a bunch of leaflets for us. There's one back and a bunch of different slogans you can have on the front. And the QR code on the back links back to this webpage that I've just linked to here, which also gives you the full pack of leaflets, which you can distribute as you want. You can print leaflets for about a tenner for 4,000 or something. So it's very, very cheap to do. And you can just knock them off on your home printer if you don't have that money, or you don't want to pay that much, or you don't need that many. And you can just hang them up around your school. You can hang them up around your college, whatever. And we did actually talk about adding a section about how to leaflet. There's some do's and don'ts. For example, don't throw them off the top of a building. It's a tempting idea, but they end up on car windshields and people crash. The block can stay, like the leaflets themselves, they can stay as a single block and hit somebody and hurt them very badly. Or they'll, best case scenario, they all end up as litter all over the place. Nobody really looks at, well, except when they're floating down, nobody really looks at them, and then they're all over the floor. So the best idea is to stick them up in places people are going to notice. Bus stops are a good plan. Just use some sticky tape, put them up on the windows. Our recommended idea is to,
or whenever you're really drunk and you're in the middle of the street sitting on a park bench and you happen to find it and you need good reading material. Like when they find the Men Are Human leaflets and you said like not to chunk it.
Yeah, stick them on park benches, stick them on vending machines is another good one. Try not to cover the products, otherwise they'll probably be ripped off. But a good plan is, because they have multiple sides, you can put up them up in a line, alternating back and front, with the different slogans alternating with the back info, which has a bunch of statistics, and a link back to the website with a QR code that you can scan, and it's all been tested working. So it should be good to go if anyone wants to do it. The backs of bathroom doors in bathroom stalls in public bathrooms are a good place to put them. That's a place where people typically don't look unless they're using the toilets themselves, so cleaners tend to miss them. You can also put them up on the walls over the urinals. That's a good one, although they're more likely to get taken down there. Go on, Dark.
What are we doing for the other groups we're working with? Are we still doing like same kind of poster personalized for them, or what's that situation?
At the moment, we're literally just doing a link back to the Men Are Human site, and I think that we could have a list of people linking to their different pages, or we could just hand out the leaflet and say, hey, change the QR code and the URL if you want. As we said on the page, you're free to modify these leaflets in any way which doesn't turn them into something awful against men.
All right,
May
so
I
you can edit them, basically.
Yeah, you can edit them if you want. It's very easy to Photoshop things, just that sort of thing. You just need to blank out the box where the URL is and where the QR code is, just stick in a new QR code. I mean, we do prefer you link back to our site, but we'd rather get the message out than have people say, no, we won't distribute the leaflets because it's your website we're linking to. But that's just the default.
May I just mention another example of anti-male discrimination in the education system? Because I talked to a guy quite a while ago, quite a lot, and he was in Norway, right? He mentioned a story where his father was told by his female teacher that she's going to downgrade him 1 grade because of his boisterous behavior. Not making this up.
That sounds fairly typical, to be honest. Teachers hate a rambunctiousness of boys, but at the same time, they're cutting back the amount of time they have to burn off energy, which is impacting them very negatively. It's from what I've heard, there is evidence that ADHD is mostly caused by boys not getting any kind of rough play when they're younger. Like, they don't get to play very much. They don't have interactive play, and it means that certain parts of their brain don't really develop properly. And it's something that teachers hate because girls sit still. Like,
I wouldn't necessarily pin that too much on the rough play. Not enough rough play for boys, because I'm telling you right now, I did not get enough rough play when I was younger either. So, and that definitely did affect me a little bit.
Well, it probably affects both genders. I mean, it's about learning the limits of your body and like understanding how it works, and it's about building a body image in your mind. And
I
it's
think
also about learning how not to hurt other people.
I think it's because I also have ADHD as well, and I think that's probably why. It's because I was very hyper as a child, and so yeah.
I was actually getting examined for if I might have ADHD today, actually. So I don't know if that applies to me as well. We'll
here's the thing: like a lot of the times, like ADHD more specifically is underdiagnosed in girls and overdiagnosed in boys because they think they see
a bit too energetic is ADHD.
Yeah,
easily,
they think they think that boys having a bunch of energy is like super is a bad thing, and so they just claim that it's ADHD, and they just like try to essentially drug them into submission, and I'm over there like huh.
Yeah, but JD wanted to say something.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Just an opportunity.
And it's not. Like, having a bunch of energy is not a bad thing. Take it from a hyperactive chick, it's not. It's not
No,
a bad
I
thing.
agree, because if you have a lot of energy, that means you can do a lot more with that energy. A lot of people just wish they had more energy because they're too tired all the time.
I call myself a dopamine addict.
But I do have a very interesting, sad example of this. Like, first I have to mention that I'm also getting examined if I have ADHD. I might just have ADD, for example, right? Because I'm not very hyperactive, right? But I have a very, very horrid example of both being underdiagnosed, and that is that one of my friends is in Switzerland, right? The other guy who was overdiagnosed. Not my friend, but the other guy. And because he had that, he was like being given like Ritalin or other medication, right? So that he would sit down, even though his behavior was barely normal. And that led to him developing like compulsive disorder, that he had to like, double speak. He spoke like, and that made him behave in a way that people thought was weird. So because of the medication, he was considered to be weird about other people, right? And because he had to take it so long, even though he didn't need it after a while, he didn't really need it in the first place, but after a while it wouldn't matter. But he still was given it and took it, right? And because he took it for so many years, he got like permanent like brain damages, basically, because of it. So that if you want to explain how boys are being treated for being a little bit too rambunctious, then that's a way they are, or at least were treated. I don't know how common that is anymore, but I assume it is.
Okay, can we let JD talk real quick?
Yeah.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
I just joined in a minute ago. If I may, could I go? I want to go back a bit to I think Kate was talking about male circumcision. I actually have something about that actually when I spoke about it before, it did cause a bit of, well, technically a lot of men actually started coming at me because I said this. Long story short, when I was born, my brother and I think it's a family thing, we were never circumcised, and we had no issues. When I started going through puberty, and you know how boys that go through puberty, they always think with the head down there. I noticed that I would get a lot of pain down there. And so my father would, growing up, my father taught me how to pull the skin back so you can clean the head. Well, I was never able to put it back. And I tried, and to the point when I was 20 years old, I was 23. I went to the doctor and I said, I'm having some issues. And he said, what's wrong? And I was like, well, I told him, I cannot pull my foreskin back. And he's like, what do you mean? I was like, it's causing some intense pain, and I have noticed I'm getting some issues here. And he said, have you tried pulling it back? And I was like, yeah, there's nothing. And he said, okay, so you're gonna have to get circumcision surgery. And I was like, why is that? Well, he's like, if you cannot pull it back, you can get a serious infection on your head, and it could be pretty dangerous. This is the doctor telling me this. And I was like, all right, so that's what I did. I actually went and I actually got circumcision surgery, and no more pain, no more issues, and there's no more discharge. Finally was able to clean it, and I'm okay with it. I tried telling this to other men, but they actually
sounds like you had a case of physmosis.
What is that?
Well, that's phimosis is tightness of the foreskin, where you cannot move it properly, basically.
Yeah, it's basically the condition you were describing, and at least in this space, as far as I know, nobody has a problem with what you ended up having to do. I mean, you were, you had a medical reason to have a procedure done. That's the beginning and end of it. There's really there's no politics
might
there
also
at all.
be possible to be cured with some creams, but I'm not a medical expert. So.
I tried everything.
It's very possible.
I tried using like this it's not a needle, but it's like a syringe that sprays water. That wasn't working. And so I have to agree with Kate on one thing. When I actually went to get the surgery, they shot me up with anesthesia. Well, the anesthesia didn't work. So I literally felt I felt everything. and it was not pleasant.
I'm
But
sorry
I
for
have
that.
to say, was it worth it? I would have to say yes, because I have no risks down there. I told my doctor, and my doctor said, if you ever have sexual intercourse and you have this problem, you can actually rip open your foreskin, and that could cause a serious problem. And
Yeah.
I had to get this done. And same thing, when I was healing, I had to get stitches. Me being a man, I remember I would get a random erection. So I'm not trying to be funny here. I told this to my brother, he died laughing. My doctor recommended, if you have an erection, distract yourself. Try singing the national anthem backwards. And I was like, why do you want me to sing it backwards? Because here's the thing, you have to really think hard. Your brain will get distracted and the erection will go away. So that's what I did. And, it healed up, and now I'm circumcised. I would have to say, in some cases, I would say I'm 50-50 in the case of circumcision. Do I think it's male mutilation? In some cases, yes. But do I think that it's necessary for other situations? Yes. So what do you guys think on my stance on that?
Well, I would
Okay,
say that it is.
I agree with you. Okay, let me just say because okay, you can see he was referencing what I was saying. Thank you so much for saying that to us, JD. But that's exactly what we're advocating for. All we want is to give men and boys the choice to actually choose whether or not they want to have a circumcision, or they want to like have it only, for a medical to do it as a medical thing. But we don't think that it should be seen as a must, or we don't think that it should be done to babies, because there are your case was bad, and I'm really happy that you're happy with the procedure that you got. But unfortunately, a lot of boys, they end up getting hurt. They end up having sometimes infections. Sometimes they even die from botched circumcisions, right? Especially in the rural areas, where they, like I said, they don't even use anesthetic, or they don't even use like clean instruments. Some of them, like, it's pretty disturbing, but like some of the so-called practitioners will end up cleaning the ouch, this is really hard for me to say, they'll end up cleaning the penis with their own mouth, and like a fully a grown adult doing that to a baby boy. I don't see that as okay. That's disgusting. Like it hurts to even think about,
That's
So
that's
yeah, exactly. It's so hard for me to even say because of how disgusting it is, So and like I mentioned, like in communities in Kenya, you are shamed heavily if you're a boy and you've not been circumcised, So that's what we want to
Same in
remove.
South Africa.
If a guy wants to do it for a medical reason, or if he wants to do it out of his own choice, we have no problem. But just don't do it to like really young kids for no reason, or don't shame men who are uncircumcised. That's all we want. We're not saying don't do it at all. I'm just saying, like, there should be nothing about shaming, or nothing about, it's if you've not done it, you're not a man, or something like that. That's just dumb.
Yeah, I
right.
would like to say that for people who do have physmosis, there are a couple of non-surgical things you can do. I don't know if it's been mentioned because my internet's been cutting out, but you can get steroid creams and you can use them to stretch the skin, and that works in the majority of cases. It can be quite slow, but you will see results. You'll see results with it.
Yeah.
Especially if it's not too bad, like you can still kind of retract it. The more you can retract it, the quicker those results are. Another
Biggest.
option, which doesn't
Sorry. Yeah.
remove the skin, is to have a small slit made. You can then stretch the skin. You can then retract the skin and stretch it as much as you need to, and then reattach it. And that's a much less destructive way of doing it.
Right.
So yeah, there are a couple of options that you can use which don't get rid of your foreskin and which are much less painful. I would recommend trying the creams first, and if those fail, get the slits. And if that fails, the circumcision, okay. But obviously, the circumcision should really be the last resort. It should be the sort of thing you get if it's really infected in there. But even if it's really infected in there, I would still recommend the slit, because the slit will do everything that the circumcision can do, and it's reversible.
That's all true. Actually, I was going to say all that, but I would also like to add to this is that it's also important to know that the American medical system is very much in line at the circumcision is always what should be done all the time, no exception, right? And that would probably not be recommended as a first solution to any issue in any other country in the world.
It mostly isn't. I mean, the NHS has been infected a little bit with circumcision rhetoric. I've messaged them a few times about changing their page on circumcision to reflect the fact that, to reflect multiple facts on there. You can have a look at it yourself. But we do want to stress that, we don't have any problem with adults doing this to themselves. It's just when people inflict it on children. And people seem to have this attitude that it solves all your problems. This has been going on for a couple of 100 years
Well, that's
now.
because they're not educated enough about it, though. That's the problem. Is we've normalized circumcision so much at a young age that we have doctors who are barely learning about circumcision, or uncircumcised people, and so then they don't really know what to do, and their first thing to go to for uncircumcised people is circumcision.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing is that they're being kept in the dark deliberately, because ignorance is very profitable to the big medical companies who really, really want to make an awful lot of money. And this is an extremely profitable procedure. They can sell the foreskin, and they make a lot of money off the initial cut itself. So,
sorry, but thank you guys for hearing me. But I got some college classes to go to, so I have to head out.
You have to listen to the live chat. But if you let us know in the text chat, that would probably be better.
All right, sorry about that.
But I would also like to apologize for because before when you say JD, I thought you said JV, because that's like my name. That's why I talked before.
I usually say J Will or J Willie. Yeah. What I also wanted to mention is that when you circumcise a person, when you go to the extremist end of it, then the man or the person with the penis is losing a lot of sensitivity in their member, which means that sex is going to be less pleasurable, and that they're going to have to do a lot more or be a lot rougher to get the same result as somebody that isn't circumcised, which is not fun for both parties if you're improper with it. It makes it even harder to.
Guys, I have a question. You can tell me if you have any experience with this, or if you know anything about it. Now I'll admit I don't know that much about like the medical side of circumcision. I'm more of the let's not shame boys side of it. But so on some like discussion groups about of male circumcision, like I've heard that apparently there are some women who like prefer circumcised penises or whatever. Like, is that a real thing? Because I've never heard of that. Or is that like?
This is a real thing. I actually do have a very interesting example of that. Is that I actually talked to a woman who actually did have the preference for circumcised penises. And she was actually circumcised herself, but only a hoodectomy, not like anything more severe, right? And she was actually the one who told me that that the circumcision she had was actually less severe than the circumcision that most boys have, right? And she was in favor of having it banned because she didn't think it made sense to have only one of them banned and not the other, which is true, right? And also so there are a lot of women who do have that preference. But if people say like, well, not all men, because if people say like, because some men say, oh, I don't have a problem with being circumcised, right? They should also listen. Why are these people who claim the circumcision is fine because they have no issue with it? By their own logic, then female circumcision is also fine because a lot of women don't have an issue with it either, right?
Sure.
So
I mean, I like big boobs, but I'm not gonna force a woman to go through plastic surgery to get bigger boobs. I'm just gonna look for women that already have bigger boobs. Generally, it's like you don't have to force somebody to have the thing that you want. You could just look for the people that already have it. Yeah.
I can tell you from just my own anecdotal experience. And I've lived in Asia, I've lived in Europe, and I live now in the United States. So I've had a fairly varied cultural experience dealing with different people and talking to women of different cultures and different backgrounds. The vast majority of women who have been with both circumcised and uncircumcised say that they prefer uncircumcised. And the vast majority of women who say they prefer circumcised have never actually been with an uncircumcised man. So that's just my anecdotal experience on that.
Wow, I didn't know that
I'm
that
a
was an actual thing.
Okay, I'm just gonna answer your question. I mean, I'm a woman, so obviously I don't have a penis or anything like that. But I will say there have been stories before. I think I've seen 2 stories. I'm gonna have to find them, but like a couple news stories of just stories of guys who were uncircumcised. And then female finds out and they freak out and they ask the guy to do something about it. And he does something rational, or she freaks out and she says something terrible. And it's really an education thing. We don't properly educate people on circumcised penises, so then they're like so not used to it when they see it.
There was a thing on Reddit actually very recently about a guy talking about he is uncircumcised and he didn't know it, and neither did his wife. He went to the doctor and oh wait, no, I might be confusing this company, but basically he told his wife that he was uncircumcised, and she was like, "What? What? You're uncircumcised?" And she just like vomited the next time she saw his dick, just because like she had this idea in her head that like I don't even know what, it's just that like the idea of an uncircumcised penis was disgusting to her, but she didn't actually know what an uncircumcised penis looked like. So she just, it's very strange. We've also come across circumcision fetishists as well. We've like come across posts by them trying to like get themselves recut as tight as possible because they didn't think their initial circumcision was tight enough. Which, when they do that, they're going to find out that it hurts to even get an erection. But we've also found them like trying to mess with their kids' genitals. So the anti-intactivist crowd is made up of some really freaky people. Like some of them are just really misguided, but most of them are fetishists, and they're really, really weird people.
Like imagine, okay, I don't usually do this a lot, but like, can you imagine the reaction that people would have if there was a straight guy who said, wait, you've not, like he said to his wife or his girlfriend, wait, you're telling me that you've not been mutilated? I'm gonna throw up right now. Of course, everyone would be like, that's disgusting. How dare he like body shame her like that, But like, when it's the opposite, people are like, oh, it's okay. Like, it's not okay to mutilate a baby, Like, that's really weird, especially for a fetish. Like, that's so weird.
Well, guys, it's been really amazing talking to all of you. It's been 2 hours and 30 minutes now, Ma, about close to it. So we are going to cut the stream for today. Feel free though to talk after we end the stream. It's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you everyone for showing up. Thank you for all the sources too. If you have any sources you want to share with us, you can always DM Ma, myself, Blue. And so that's it for today. We will be here next Friday, 5:30 UK time, 11:30 Central. And always feel free to let us know what topic you would like us to talk about. Goodbye.